the On Target Institute presents a teaching from the Men on Target small group curriculum.
Hello men, how are you doing? I'm not Italian, but I do love Italian food. It is so good to be with you today. I want to welcome you to Men on Target. I'm Craig Glass, the president of Peregrine Ministries. Our mission is to guide and inspire men to pass on a life-giving legacy. And so it's my honor to be able to share with you a couple of special sessions on legacy. There's a module 5, sessions 33, and then later on 34. It's very important that you download the handout resources for this series at otm.co. Leaving a life-giving legacy. We hear that word legacy periodically, but don't talk about it very often. It's really what's handed down from an ancestor or a predecessor to someone else. It's handed down. What I like to talk about legacy is I refer to it as being the part of you that lives in the lives of other people. It's not just something you hand down like money or property, finances, that sort of thing. It's your touch, it's your impact in the lives of other people. Your thumbprint that influences others, those that you love in particular. Scripture says in Proverbs 13:22, a good life gets passed on to the grandchildren. A good life gets passed on to the grandchildren. I think we're motivated and inspired by that. Most men want to pass on a good life to others, but very few of us really think about, on a day-to-day basis, how am I doing that? We will pass on a legacy, that's for sure. Main question is, what kind of a legacy will it be? What am I passing on? We're going to talk about 3 principles related to a life-giving legacy. The first is, we receive an inheritance. We receive from those who went before us an inheritance. It's everything, all of the factors that made us who we are today. Our parents, most importantly, the family that we grew up in, or the family that broke up and was destroyed all around us perhaps. The schools, the churches that we attended, our ethnicity, the neighborhood that was around us. It's all of these factors that determine our inheritance. It was poured into us. We might refer to it as our soil. It's kind of like the soil around us that our seed was planted into, and we bloomed into the man that we are today. That's our inheritance. A number of years ago, my mom passed away, and right after that, my siblings and I decided to take my father onto a legacy trip to Northern Ireland, where his parents were born and grew up. That was part of my inheritance. Northern Ireland, Irish heritage. Some of it was good. My grandfather was a Christian. He was a provider. He was present in his home. He was a streetcar motorman on the south side of Chicago. But on that trip, my brothers and my sister and I learned something new from my father, who was then 88 years old, that he had never told us about his dad, my grandfather. In the 1930s, during Prohibition, my grandfather, a Christian, ran a speakeasy on the south side of Chicago. My siblings and I were stunned. We could not believe this. We did not see this coming. Great-grandfather, great Christian man, ran a speakeasy, a legal operation, during the Prohibition years in Chicago. I never knew that before. Some of my inheritance is good. Some of it has some sin attached to it. There's no denying it. That got poured into me. Those stories, even if I don't know about them, are part of my inheritance. Some of it's for good, some of it's not so good. The same is true for every one of you men. Some of our inheritance is healthy, is good, is positive. Some is negative and damaged. For some of us, we could define it as being a blessing. For some of us, others of us, we might define it as being destruction. I know that that's true for some of you who are listening to this. What kind of a legacy will we pass on? The first principle is we receive an inheritance. It gets poured into us. The second principle is we pass on a legacy. That's what we pour out from us into the lives of other people. Now, here are a couple of important things about inheritance and legacy. Inheritance is poured into us. We don't get to choose that. Those are the factors around us when we're a child, when we're dependent on others. We don't get to choose those factors, but we can choose our legacy. There, we can make some decisions that influence what do we pass on to other people. In Scripture, Jeremiah 32:18 says this, I find these to be very sobering and convicting words. You show love to thousands, but bring the punishment for the father's sins into the laps of their children after them. Those are very convicting, but also motivating words for every one of us. Another passage says, the sins of the father are laid in the laps of their children after them for 3 and 4 generations. What does that mean? That means that when I sin, men, when I choose to pursue destructive behavior, it doesn't just stay with me, it lays in the laps of my children after me. I pass that on. Many years ago, in a suburb near where I grew up in Chicago, a couple of generations ago, it was a tiny little farm town. And one of the people who owned some property in that town had a couple of acres, and his family, for a number of years, collected all sorts of worn-out, rusted items that they put in the backyard and the front yard. Old lawnmowers, a washing machine, dryer, tractors that were rusted out, a Greyhound bus. I've seen these things. I drove by them many years ago. But the thing that stood out the most was the fuselage of a DC-3 airplane. This is in the backyard of a suburb of Chicago. Well, over a period of time, this became to be a problem. The suburb grew. It's now over 100,000 people. The zoning laws changed, of course, and eventually the neighbors and the city fathers came to this man and said, in effect, hey, it's about the airplane in your backyard. Either that has to move or you have to move. The local newspaper came to him and interviewed him, and they asked him the question, what's your reaction to that, what they've told you? His response was amazing. What he said was, our family has been collecting junk for generations. We don't know how to do anything else. Those words pierced me when I read them in the paper. Our families collect junk for generations, and some of them don't know how to do anything else. All of our families do this to a certain extent, men. We pass on things that we inherited. Those sins or those patterns that are harmful and damaging or destructive get laid in our laps, and without any intentionality, we pass them on to other people. We pass them on to our children or our wives or those that we influence, those who are a part of everyday life for us. These are the 2 first principles that I want to refer to. First of all, we receive an inheritance. We don't get to choose that. Secondly, we pass on a legacy. That we can choose. The third principle I'll just refer to briefly here is transformation determines that legacy. That's the good news. And we'll talk a lot about that in more detail in the next session. But the life implication for us here in this session is we collect junk. And we pass that on to other people without being intentional. It's almost the default mode. What gets poured into us, we pour out to others, unless there's transformation. Here's the life application for you. 3 questions I'd like you to talk about with a friend or in a small group. 3 questions. The first is, how would you rank your family inheritance on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being, it was a terrible junkyard. It was awful. It was destruction. Or 10 being, man, it was a dream. It was paradise. I have no complaints. I can't imagine anything going wrong in all of my childhood. Probably we're going to fall somewhere between 1 and 10 in these. Think this through. How would you rank your family inheritance 1 to 10? And then share that with the men who are with you. Secondly, what words would you use to describe the impact of your family of origin on you? Words like abandonment, abuse, woundedness, or words like blessing, gift, strength, faith. What kind of words would you use to describe that impact of your family of origin on you? And then thirdly, what similarities or differences do you see in what you are now passing on to your family, or if you don't have a family, what you are passing on to others who are around you, others that you influence? Main question being, is it automatically the same? What you received now is default, what you pass on, or are there some similarities or differences that you see in your life now? Those are the 3 questions that I'd like you to talk about with your friends, and God bless you as you do that, as you think through what legacy you have received and what you are now passing on. God bless you.